Welcome to the Business Performance Podcast, where we feature expert thought leaders and cover their best strategies, stories, and advice that you can use to successfully mature your own business performance. Now, here is your host, business coach, Henry Schneider. Hello, everyone. This is Henry Schneider with the Business Performance Podcast. And today it's my pleasure to talk with Blaji Ramanujam, who's an interim CIO for the Tatom Group, but he's also currently working on a stealth startup company in the same sort of role. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry.
So Blaji, could you please describe first what I guess the Tatom Group does, the type of customers, and the kinds of products and services that you provide there?
Yeah, so Tatom is an interim C-level placement company. So they specialize in that. It's part of Randstad, which is a large staffing company. So we specialize in C-level placements and getting in the door, getting the ship running as quickly as possible, steering it in the way that the management wants. So I play interim CIO in that. That was my last engagement. So prior to that, I have been a CIO, a career CIO as well. So okay. I bring that experience.
And is that the same type of role you are with the stealth startup?
The stealth startup is more of the technological innovation and entrepreneurship. Yes, it's about producing business value like I always do as a CIO as well.
Okay. All right. So you're just leveraging the same skill set.
Absolutely.
All right. And as you mentioned before we started, you still want to keep the lid on it until you get your first paying customers. So
that is correct.
So hopefully fairly soon you'll have an announcement that you can tell the world about.
I hope so too. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So to begin with, I always like to ask everybody what their opinion is about quality. And so could you tell me what quality means to you?
So quality has changed a lot in the recent years in that it's become more centered around the customer, right? It's all about customer centricity. An example from my own life, we were ready to deploy something that the customer wanted, or they had expressed a great desire for. We had that ready. We were about to deploy. Then somebody rang the alarm bell saying there's been a quality issue. Well, we looked deeper. It was a quality issue with the deployment package. So my next question was, is there a manual way of deploying so that the customers still get what they want at the time that we had, liked it to reach to them? And the answer was yes. And then so we had to redefine the QA process we had to change the rules of the engagement with the QA team to allow for this deployment to go through manually. And the most important lesson there was the customer comes first, right? So if there are internal issues, quality issues, albeit within the quality realm, so be it, but the customer matters first. So whatever quality we can deliver around the customer, it comes first. So that's the mindset I was trying to change, and that's where we're headed. So the metrics today that we would like to measure in terms of qualities, it has to be all around the customer, right? Repeat usage, if they had no problems, no glitches in their journey on using our platform, using our suite of products, and that's where quality comes, so in my opinion.
Very good. I know a lot of times everybody's just focused in on the defects, trying to get all the defects out. But if you don't get the defects out that matter to the customer, it doesn't matter how hard you work on doing it.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So how do you then keep a focus on the customer to know exactly what they're concerned about so you meet their needs from a quality perspective?
So I'm a big fan of the lean startup method. So we have a set of hypotheses that we always come up with based on user behavior. The past behavior definitely shapes, some of the hypotheses, but we come up with some innovative solutions as well. We try to deploy them, see how they behave, right? So we look at the engagement, the rules of engagement, and did they meet our expected, results? Did they hit the targets that, we said they have to spend 30 seconds on these set of, promotional offers we give, and they have to bite on one, they have to click on one. So I'm just giving you some examples. So we would have a proposed path, and we would look at the actual path they took and look at the difference, and then refine, course correct, and deploy again, and keep measuring until we get their behavior really nailed, and we are able to service them in the ways that they would like to be serviced. So,
Yeah, so basically working very closely with the customer.
yes.
So, but now the problem that can come up with in situations like that is you're not talking to the right person at the customer side, and you're meeting one set of expectations, but not really what maybe they really want. So how do you
That is true. So I'm again a big believer of it's not what they say they want, it's what they do when you present them with solutions. So, surveys or focus groups give us some information, but it's not a whole lot these days. So it's all about rapidly deploying solutions to the real customer, real users. So if you look at Facebook, for example, they deploy, a lot of solutions every day, and they try to test out very small hypotheses that users hardly notice, but it informs them tremendously on what they should be doing next, right? So it's that cumulative effect is something I look for. So it may be smaller changes, but looking at, those and doing A/B testing, especially. So dividing real users into, different groups and being able to test the same thing across groups to see how they react, how they engaged with us, and which one matches closely to our hypothesis is something we constantly measure against.
Okay, all right. Now, going along with that, as you're working with customers, what are some of the biggest misconceptions out there when it comes to quality or performance with the people you work with?
So I think a lot of it, people get hung up on quality in terms of processes, right? So if we fall short of this process, there's a quality, it can lead to quality issues, but then ultimately does that again impact the customer? So working backwards from the customer behavior, customer experience standpoint is very important. And quality groups generally tend to get hung up on processes and adherence to processes more than how it impacts the customer. So if we shifted that, then everything aligns well, in my opinion.
Okay, and that brings up some interesting topics here, because on process quality, there is a lot to be said for that, but because you invest a lot of time, money, and resources in building these things, but if you built it such that there's no value add to it, or it's too cumbersome to use, then you got problems there as well.
Right. My point was earlier, if it comes at the cost of impacting the customer, then we have designed it wrongly. So we need to redesign it to make sure no matter what, the customer comes first. Their lifetime value is more important than our processes. So the example I was giving you earlier was, again, should we deploy it? Should we postpone a deployment just because we had a problem with the automation in deployment, versus will the customer benefit from what we deploy, even if it was a painful and manual process, right? And the question there is, would that lead to errors again on the customer side, right? And if the answer is no, then we have every reason to scramble behind the scenes to make that work for the customer.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now, what is one of the biggest challenges that you face with performance as an interim CIO's perspective?
For me, it's mostly culture issues, people being very anxious about changes. I come in mostly as a transformational CIO to drive digital transformation, to change the way businesses are traditionally run, to include more technology, to include more metrics that are newer, where it's all about the customer and their usage and their lifetime value and their experience, right? To define those metrics around the customer and to bring that back to saying, these are the process changes we need to adopt. People do get nervous. So those are some of the challenges that I've seen traditionally, that there's a cultural resistance to all these changes.
Definitely. Now, I was just thinking here in terms of metrics, how do you stay current or on top of what the current situation is with metrics. Because I mean, a lot of times people will lock into that and they'll stay with it and say, okay, here we got it, and they'll just keep that going. How do you keep it refreshed and current and relevant?
That's a great question, because for me, again, for every sprint, there'd be a hypothesis, and the hypothesis would have a way of measuring what is expected from the customer. That becomes my metric at that point. That's the first metric. So in my experience, every sprint or every MVP defines or brings a new set of metrics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So when we're talking about the challenges, how do you get people to overcome those fears of the challenge so you can move forward?
So that's, again, something that I enjoy answering, actually, in that I usually draw up a matrix where I define things that are common, that are not likely to change, and things that are likely to change. And usually the list is much smaller. The list for things that are likely to change is smaller than things that are common. So highlighting the commonality, highlighting what will not change and stay the same, where people can feel comfortable about, and then things that they would slowly steer towards, in terms of a transformation, and making it, really visual for them, and making it look like the evolution that it is, even though it can be revolutionary through some turns. But for them, they would realize that, wow, I thought everything was going to change. I didn't realize 7 of the 10 things were going to stay the same. To bring that knowledge, to make that visual, to make that presentable to them, is something that I've worked towards, and it's worked well for me.
All right. So again, it's a lot of communication and expectation setting.
And it's about quantifying the changes, very specifically looking at skills, looking at processes, looking at metrics, and being able to say, these are things we measure today already, or we have knowledge in some ways. This is how we're going to interpret it going forward, or capture the data going forward. So then people understand. There's an aha moment at that point.
Okay. Are there any other perceived obstacles that you encounter that might prevent you making your clients successful?
I would say, besides culture, it can be legacy, platform, or technology, or ways of doing things, right, that are so set that there's a cost involved, very big cost involved in the change itself, not just culturally, but there's so much risk involved in making the transition, because apparently things are working so well, and it's so well defined for both the company and its customers, that they don't see what else can be happening, or the changes that the competition is bringing, or the potential competition that's likely to come and take over, right? So that's another challenge that I see, to be able to help them visualize that competition can come from just about anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So when you're working with the clients as interim CIO, has it all been on the commercial side, or have you done any government work?
I have done a lot of government work as well. So it was back in, at ASI, it was engaging with a lot of government stakeholders to bring in the change in their space. I was not only doing CIO work for ASI, I was also engaging with more than about 150 agencies to consume our products, to be able to integrate our product with their productivity suite, where people could directly access, right? And there was that. Prior to that, at CVP Customer Value Partners, I was working with many federal CIOs and consolidating data centers, moving everything to the cloud, and so creating those private and public clouds. Those are some things I've done, on very big budget programs, actually, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, because the reason I brought that up is because that's where you get a lot of the resistance. You got these huge legacy systems.
Yes.
You have to replace if you want to be innovative. But
yes.
The tentacles go way out, and it's hard to really.
You're absolutely right. And if it ain't broken, don't fix it kind of mentality too. And you have to work through that.
Yeah, I know you got people that have made a career out of working there, and it's like, this is the way we've done it for the last 30 years. Why do we need to change?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, could you share a story now how you helped a specific client to overcome these obstacles and be successful?
Yes, I'd go back to the last engagement where it was a very traditional operations heavy company. They were mostly focused on deploying people every single day on the field to collect, trash and a few other services, to be able to walk in there, to create a shift in terms of, it was a paradigm shift in that everybody started to use an app to monitor where they were headed, what other services can be added to, in terms of, not only just collecting trash, is there something else we can do, right? Then, everybody came to this idea of expanding the suite of services, to include house cleaning, pet walking, uh, car detailing, and a number of services. So the obstacles were obviously that there's a successful business model that's operationally heavy. How do we become a tech enabled company where everything is through an app? We have a worker app, we have a monitoring app where we monitor all the traffic, right? Where people are headed and where the demand is, who's asking for what. And then there's the resident app where the residents are sitting in their living rooms and trying to order services.
Okay. So that was like, that's with like one, like an apartment complex or a housing.
It was an apartment complex across uh, about 1.5 million residents across the U.S., across 37 states, if I remember.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And I know when
It's a
we
big
talked
project.
earlier, I thought it was focused on like one little development, but this is a nationwide across all. Okay. All right.
It's a nationwide, it was, yeah, project.
Okay. So if you could distill that down to a simple phrase or a moral, what would be the moral of the story?
As there's not a single business where technology is impacting positively. So
Mhm.
every business could use, the latest in digital technology to become better.
Mhm. So how can others then if change achieve similar results?
I think they have to again start imagining what else their business can be, because if they don't imagine, someone else will do it for them and
Mhm.
take over. That's what's happening with a lot of businesses today.
Yeah, yeah, I know. From what you said, it sounds pretty interesting because you kept adding on different things. Where you start out with just garbage collection, but then you added on all these other little services. So how did you determine what additional services to add?
So that was more of a management and board level discussion, because we had to be prepared operationally as well, right? There's technology on the one hand, but then being able to upskill the workers, to be able to train, to be able to deploy, to be competent in those areas is another larger discussion. So we had to have both in parallel. One was the technology prong, the other was getting ready with the right people at the right time and at the right cost too. So
Okay. All right. Now, when it comes to quality, and what are some of the common pitfalls and mistakes that people need to keep in mind to as to move forward, so you don't keep going down and making the same mistakes over and over and over again?
it is an interesting question, because technology interfaces with a lot of the real world solutions. Quality can become qualitative, right? In that, it can be very subjective. Uber being a great example, it was very disruptive, but quality is measured in terms of different parameters like safety, right? Is also, whether we like it or not, as a quality constraint. So the quality of the ride, was it safe enough for me, right? Is something that every woman has to think about for
Yeah.
an Uber ride. So quality there would mean being able to seek help, being able to seek protection, being able to, you know, um, inform people before trouble can start, right? Or as soon as it starts, to get immediate help. So quality would be measured there. Again, it's all about the customer, but again, it's so qualitative, it's so subjective in that you have to be at the right time, at the right moment, to leverage digital technology to allow people to be safe enough to have that experience that they desire, which is a smooth ride
Mhm.
and
All right.
safe ride.
So, what advice do you give, or would you give to people or companies that are trying to handle disruption and innovation?
I would say it's not as scary as it looks in terms of being able to adopt or deploy. It's just that everybody needs to start thinking about ways their businesses will be disrupted. Because if they don't, someone else is actively imagining that for you. And before you know, it's going to be too late, and they will have taken a significant portion of your business.
Mhm.
So, without scaring them, I would say there's humongous opportunity in imagining what else your business can be with digital, with the levers of digital, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of approaching business, and because like you know, just the way companies have matured over time too. The ones that have been successful have changed their business models and stay relevant. And where they started out as a business is entirely different from where they are today.
yes, Domino's is a great example. Panera is another good example where they've really jumped the digital bandwagon and started imagining ways ahead of their rivals actually today. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me is that with Amazon, what they that they've got to continually be innovative to stay at the bleeding edge. Otherwise, somebody's going to come in and take over.
Right. So there's Walmart always looking at, because they have the physical presence, right, in every city, about every 10 miles. So to be able to compete with that is going to be a constant battle, right? So anytime that Amazon falls back on any of these expectations, it's to Walmart's advantage, in my opinion. So there's always going to be that struggle.
Yeah, I saw an article here this week where something is news with Amazon is that they are now taking requirements and drawing an image for you. So if you say, show me some black pants, they'll generate some images of black pants for you. So you can
Yes.
do online shopping that way.
And there's always been this augmented reality application, right? So where you can actually try on different clothes. You can just point your camera, start to, you can stand up and try on different clothes. There's always been that experiment going on. At some point, it'll mature where people are actually able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's really easy to change the color. Once you've got the style, you can just put it.
Yes. So once the dimension and style are set, you're allowing the system to capture all of that, and you're participating actively, giving them the feedback. I think it makes it a lot faster. So.
Okay, so let's change topics a little bit here now and talk about your experience and career. What defining moment inspired you to become an interim CIO and get involved with innovative technologies?
So for me, I did not have a dramatic moment per se. It was more incremental. It was organic. It just happened naturally. In that, I started my career as a developer, writing code for fighter aircraft. It was the DoD 2167A mill standard, very regimented, very technical at the same time, very engineering oriented, and then started to build Oracle-based, databases and large-scale billing platforms, and then moved on to speech recognition systems, building speech recognition systems for large airlines and a number of other clients, and then scaling it up further to international customer care operations, right, where millions of live calls kept coming in every day. And how do you build a platform on the cloud? Then came, shadowing the CIO and running the transformation, and then slowly starting to becoming a CIO myself, to again helping others with my, experience and expertise that I've gained over the years. So that's been my progression. So such.
So it sounds like with your progression, it was always like going the next step with technology. You were staying apace with it.
Somehow, yeah, I've been fortunate to do that. Yes.
Yeah, so that's why you don't have like an epiphany.
Right.
But yeah, that's slowly evolved. I guess so you could go look backwards and kind of chart your progress. But again, like I was just saying, where you started out from is entirely different from where you are today.
Absolutely.
Gradual
Yes.
evolution there. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now in a similar vein, thinking about your life in general, could you share an experience you had early on where that still influences how you approach business today?
Sure. For me, growing up, I think I had a cohort that, we always wanted to solve problems. We wanted to be inventors somehow. We fantasize being Edisons and Newtons, and we wanted to be really people who didn't think like others, who wanted to think about things that would solve problems at scale. It was not just about inventing something and being creative. It was about what can solve a larger problem, right? So, and anti-gravity. So I still am working at it. It's work in progress, right? So is there a large scale anti-gravity solution that we can create, right? So things like that. So that led me to constantly think about technology, engineering, and problem solving at scale. So I'm still fantasizing being that Edison-like person where, the light bulb will go across cities, not in just one home, right? So
Yeah.
there's that
Yeah.
dream.
Well, and now some of those problems, I guess, we're bound by the laws of physics. So you really can't do too much with anti-gravity or
Well,
gravity.
I would like to believe there's a way out. Just saying, keep the hope alive, suspend disbelief and keep imagining, and there will be something.
Yeah, I know. Hollywood does a great job in that.
Yes.
It'd be nice if we could somehow harness that imagination and make it turn into reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now, again, to kind of shift gears a little bit. So what does success look like for Blaji Ramanujam?
Success to me would be, again, being able to impact civilization, being able to do something that's so humbling in the sense of problems, right? Solving problems that exist today, being able to tackle those, I think will be very meaningful to me. Yeah, so whatever it is, if I'm able to play a small role in a significant change, then that would be a very, very good purpose for my, living and for my life.
All right, so now you started with this stealth project.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see something that's going to come down the pipe after you bring this to the market and start working, or are you going to stay with that area and keep developing it?
So again, I'm going to do the MVP path, so which is like the minimum viable product. So I'm going to see if our customers are biting, if there's more gravity towards usage and the need is, the unmet need is really realized through this product, then I'd start piling on that, build capabilities, get more investment, and then go big, right? So right now I'm demonstrating to a number of clients to see how a portion of their unmet needs is met with this problem, with this solution rather.
So how many people do you have working with you right now on the solution?
I just have 6 people.
6. Okay, small, tight team.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have some vendors and help from others too. It's slightly larger than 6 in terms of the shadow that I get, shadowing support.
Okay. And are you looking nationwide, or are you kind of stay local right now and then build it out? Or?
This is international, actually, across, at least for now, it's U.S. and Canada.
Oh, okay.
2 countries we're looking at.
All right. So now I ran across a statement a few weeks ago. Yeah, it says that small cap companies can't offset the rising labor costs associated with technology as easily as large caps. So is that a statement that you agree with?
I think that's correct in terms of if they are completely dependent on in-house staffing, right? So if that's their model, it's a big struggle, especially with visa regulations and changes with the H-1 visa. In the recent years, the restriction there has definitely impacted the labor force. I've felt that firsthand myself. In hiring people, right? In my first to hire people. However, it's all about innovation, staying entrepreneurial and innovative even under these circumstances. There are ways that we can figure out a business model that can, still get you access to talent from, maybe an outsourced model is something we go with for now and then try to scale it at some point. So there are ways we can still achieve what we want to, I think, at cost. I mean, within our budget is what.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm thinking here in terms of like small cap companies want to look at innovation and going with artificial intelligence, RPAs, but some of this stuff is pretty costly to do. So
Yes.
how would you help a small cap company overcome those cost obstacles and so that they could implement this?
I think Some of that is changing thanks to open source, right? Code. And if it's a tech, I can only speak for, technology based solutions and
Mhm.
business models, right? So for that, there's a plethora of, tools and capabilities that are in the, somewhere in the cloud, somewhere that's open source that people can readily access, from GitHub, for example. They can just they have to learn to be a little more technical to get that. There's always Coursera and a number of other, open
Mhm.
universities where you can just go in, learn something, get better, and then go start playing with these open source tools to actually deploy. But yes, it does require a lot of self-help and self-training. If you
Mhm.
really want to succeed, you have to work hard individually.
Yeah, and the other question that keeps coming up too is like as you're trying to do these innovative techniques in data analysis, getting access to the data so you can do the analysis to draw your cognitive insight into what's going on. Do you have any good suggestions on how to get access to data without having to pay for it?
That's a tough one, actually, because everybody wants data today, right? And real data to the point where they want personal information too. So I think that's a tough nut to crack. What you could, again, there are a number of open source data sources where it will give you some trending information. Google itself gives you Google Trend, right? That's a huge lever, in my opinion. You can actually hang your code on that to make sure you're tracking some of the things people are doing out there. It can be any search or anything that's behavioral, if that's the data you're looking for. If you're looking for personal information or real user data for a very esoteric workflow, that's tough. That's going to cost money.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing is, I mean, you can go and you can scrape data off of social media, but I think you'd have to be really careful because, of the validity of that information that you're gathering off of Twitter or Facebook and Instagram, etc.
There are APIs out there that can go get some trending information, but again, there's a thin line between personal information versus trending information. So there's a lot of balancing that needs to happen there. So I'm a little averse to overstating that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that. I know that's a very fine line. That's why we have the GDPR and the new laws in California, as well as to what you can actually do with this information or
That's
what
correct.
access to.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So another question here is thought-provoking is what are your top three concerns or capability challenges that you see as a CIO?
In terms of capability challenges, would again, it would look obvious there, but first is culture, right? We have to have a culture of innovation. The second is all about the customer, realigning every capability that we have, rejigging every capability we have constantly to work our results around the customer, because the customer's needs are going to evolve and change, and we have to evolve and change at the same pace or even faster, right, to get ahead. The third would be to develop the technical skills that are required to deliver in time and in an innovative manner. So you need to think outside the box in terms of technology or tools and outpace your competition to really be sharp there in terms of leveraging tools or inventing tools. So
Yeah,
technical skills do matter.
yeah, that's a fine balance and trying to understand, you know, how do you, if you don't have the capability for the technology, but you have a good idea what you want to do, how do you overcome that so then you can actually deliver and meet the customer's expectations?
Yeah, that's a good question. The good news is there's so much out there in terms of open source tools that you should be able to pull some of the pieces together to make it fit to at least 60 or 70% to what you're looking at. And the customization part would be only 30% in a lot of cases, is what I've noticed.
Okay. Yeah. So as you start to pull these solutions together, even with your stealth project, how do you get the value add? So the customer says, okay, yeah, I need to go to you to get this. Otherwise, other than just trying, well, I can do the open source route myself.
So again, it takes a lot of technical skills. It takes a lot of knowing what's out there and how to use it. The biggest skill that the CIO brings to the table is being able to repurpose what's already out there, right? So how do you design a system, and how do you design for the needs that your customer would have? To understand that first, then also have the knowledge of what's out there to add those, to bring those two together is something that's very unique to a CIO, actually.
Okay. All right. So now let's kind of look from a customer's perspective. So if a customer is going to come to Tatom for an interim CIO, what's the most important question they should be asking when they are evaluating Tatom against the competition?
I think the first question should be, do they have a track record of making a business impact, right? So have they impacted businesses in the past, positively impacted? And if so, what are the stories? So get that story to see if it'll fit again, if they have a track record of doing that.
Okay. All right. And okay, so now let's talk about just the lessons you've learned over your career. If you had to start your career over from scratch, what behaviors would you keep and what would you do differently today?
So a lot of it, right? So I would first take a lot more risks, like many people would say. I would be more entrepreneurial. I would go far out with technology, try to create new capabilities in technology, right? So I used to do a lot of coding back then. So I would continue to code away to create newer capabilities, get it out in the open source to see what other ideas people have, constantly be more innovative and create newer solutions. So I would be very entrepreneurial if I were going back and say, just take as many risks as you want in terms of launching capabilities, getting the market to test it, validate it for you. So that's what I would do again.
Okay. So now with open source, if you're working on something that's very specific, how do you get other people involved or interested in helping you out from an open source perspective?
So it has to be purpose driven, right? So you have to draw upon the common purpose that we have. And from that purpose comes capabilities. And we'd say, let's define, usually what I do is I quantify it with 5 or 10 capabilities that we need to acquire. Mm-hmm. And then I share it with a group by saying, do we all agree or do we want to change the set? And we firm up the 10 capabilities. We score against the tools that are out there. Mm-hmm. We score, it's a weighted score as well, because one capability may be more important than the other, right? Mm-hmm. So we get that. And then we get everybody involved by saying, let's pluck this capability, this tool from this open source, this module from GitHub for this purpose, to meet the purpose, to meet this requirement. And there's probably 20% change or 30% change, because the weighted score would reveal how much effort is involved in even tweaking that. So those are some of the things that I would do to get people engaged. So.
Okay. All right. So now I guess we're rapidly running out of time here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. So Blaji, how can people get in touch with you to learn more about you and the services you provide?
I think the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn tag is BALOGY. So if linkedin.com/n/BALOGY is the best way to find me.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, Blaji, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Henry. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Business Performance Podcast with your business coach, Henry Schneider. For more episodes and business strategies, please visit welcome.ppqc.net/blog. That's www.welcome.ppqc.net/blog. And remember to subscribe so you can get the latest episodes. Thank you.